This was ordained by fate. Now, this is what I call...
Error. I think this time it turned out.
Come, try some creative cooking. Restaurant? That place isn't even worth mentioning.
One step closer.
That place isn't even worth mentioning. Come, try some creative cooking.
Who's your ideal partner?
What's going on, YouTube? It's about time to talk about Mona again. And yes, I'm using her alternate skin because I'm not out of control levels of horny. Looking at you, Twitch chat, I'm a really big fan of Mona because I like pointy hats, but also she's extremely relatable. Not in the idea of following star signs and constellations or anything, but just in the fact that I'm terribly broke. Today, I'm going to be going over everything you need to know about Mona's kit and builds in detail, so that way you can take full advantage of this astrologer after you lose your 50-50. Before we get started though, if you enjoy this type of video, make sure to leave a like so YouTube knows the video doesn't suck, and consider subscribing. We're almost to 100k subscribers, and it would mean the world to me if we could get that number before the end of summer. With all that being said, my name is Braxphone, and let's talk about Mona. So the first thing to know about Mona is that there are tons of Mona playstyles. You can play her as a character, action-packed dungeons, pretty versatile unit as a result of Mona triggers reactions. You can play her in reverse vape where Xiangling triggers the reaction. You can play her in So the first thing to know about Mona is that there are tons of Mona playstyles. You can play her in a forward Vaporize team where Mona triggers reactions, you can play her in reverse Vape where Xiangling triggers the reaction, you can play her in a Taser setup, you can play her in a nuke team for one-shotting bosses, or you can play her as a support for freeze. She's a pretty versatile unit as a result of all that. Though there are characters that do a better job of being a Hydro damage dealer, she's got support capabilities that are completely unique to her. In the interest of time, I won't be going over every build for all 5 playstyles in this video. I'll just be focusing on Vaporize teams and support Mona, but I'll be going in depth about builds so you understand why each thing is best. So this video is just going to cover Vape Mona, which is going to be abusing charged attacks to get Vaporizes, and support Mona, which will fit into basically any team. With that being said, let's talk about Mona's kit in just a second, after this short message from our sponsor. This video was brought to you by Dungeon Fighter on tons of free, and I highly recommend. As the only non-healer Hydro Catalyst, Mona has some pretty cool features. First off, her charged attack scaling is pretty decent. It means that she can actually output okay damage in forward Vaporize. Her elemental skill is a taunt that deals a small bit of damage over time, and you can press the skill to place the taunt right where the nearest enemy you're targeting is, or you can just hold her skill to move backwards and place her skill where she was just standing. Now the cool thing is that the skill actually has iframes too, so you can dodge hits with it if you're pretty good at the game. The cooldown is about 12 seconds, and it generates 3 to 4 particles after exploding, which honestly causes a couple problems for Mona's energy. By the time the taunt blows up, you're likely not going to have Mona on field to pick up the particles, but we'll talk about how to fix that in the build section. One other thing to note is that Mona's Hydro application with her taunt isn't super great. She can still apply Hydro to enemies and be played in freeze teams, but they're not going to stay frozen between each tick like they would with Kokomi. That's why a lot of players prefer Kokomi in freeze setups. Now Mona's burst is the best part of her kit. It does a few things. It applies a debuff to enemies that makes your team deal extra damage to enemies, applies Hydro, traps smaller enemies, and explodes for massive damage. When you cast her burst, she'll apply a bubble effect to enemies. When you deal any damage that affects poise, the bubble will pop and deal high damage to the enemies affected. Now when enemies are frozen, cryo and hydro hits won't actually affect their poise, which means that the bubble won't pop if you freeze them with Mona. All you have to do is have cryo applied to them first and then use her burst, and that will freeze them with the omen debuff, and you'll be able to get the full duration out of it. Because one thing that the skill doesn't mention is that her damage bonus she grants against marked enemies actually starts as soon as the bubble hits enemies, but doesn't need to actually be popped. So essentially, you can freeze enemies using Mona's omen, and if you keep them frozen long enough, her bubble will pop on its own after 8 seconds, and at talent 8, you could keep the damage bonus for a total of 13 seconds. 8 from the bubble, 5 from the leftover omen duration. Her burst also has a short cooldown, so she brings a ton of value to freeze teams. One last thing is that her burst applies Hydro twice, once on the cast and once on the bubble pop. This thing is that her burst applies Hydro twice, once on the cast of value to freeze teams. One last thing is that her burst applies Hydro twice, once on the cast and once on the bubble pop. So hypothetically, if you wanted to vaporize with Mona, you could use Bennett's burst, which would apply pyro to the enemy, use Mona's burst to cancel out the pyro aura, wait a couple of seconds for internal cooldown, and then use Bennett's skill to pop the bubble, which is going to apply pyro to the enemy again right before Mona's bubble pops and applies Hydro for a huge hit of vaporized damage. Mona is a super high skill ceiling character that gets carried by knowledge of her kit, so as long as you know what she does and how her burst works, you're going to be able to get a lot of value out of her. Now, outside of her normal abilities, her first Ascension passive will create taunts if you sprint for more than 2 seconds, and her second Ascension passive gives Mona Hydro damage bonus based on 20% of her energy recharge, which makes it easier to play her as a support and get bonus damage out of her. Essentially, that just means that if you're going for uptime on her, you're losing a bit of damage, but it's not as much damage as you could be losing because she can actually take advantage of some of the energy recharge as Hydro damage bonus. Mona is definitely an underrated character in everyday play, and that's half due to Kokomi existing, but also partially due to people not understanding her kit. So I hope I explained it fairly well, and if you need a reminder, feel free to skip back a bit in the video. As far as talent priority goes, you want to prioritize her burst most of the time since it affects the omen duration, omen strength, and damage scaling up until level 8. That being said, if you have her on field dealing damage, you can also focus on her basic attacks first. Her skill isn't useless, but generally you just don't really need to level it, so it should be your last priority. Now, before we get into weapons and builds, I want to talk to you guys about so it should be your last priority. Now, before we get into weapons and builds, I want to talk to you guys about constellations. There's one thing that everyone should know going into Mona constellations, but also we can go over the value of each one. Mona, you don't really need constellations for her to be good, but I want to talk about a few important things with constellations for her. First off, her constellation 1 is pretty good, but there's some poor wording on it. All electrocharged, vaporized, and freeze duration only extends if you activate the freeze with. So just be aware there's about 1 billion weapons that Mona can use, and she will likely be able to use a lot of newer ones that come out in the future. So I really don't want to go over every single one because then the video would be like 50 minutes long, but I do want to mention some of the better ones of both the 5 stars and the 4 stars. So for a DPS build, for Mona on field, your best 5-star option is going to be Lost Prayer of Sacred Winds, which is essentially going to give you stacks of elemental damage bonus. However, it does have a downside, and it's that its stacks reset whenever you leave the field. So the only way this is good is if she's on field dealing damage for more than 4 seconds at a time. Outside of that, and the crit rate it gives, it can actually get beaten out by other 5-star weapons as well, like Kagura's Verity and Skyward Atlas. Now, Kagura's Verity will see the most value in Electrocharged and Freeze, since you can use Mona's skill there, but you don't really want to use her skill in Vaporized teams, so in that case, she'll get less value out of Kagura's. And again, Skyward Atlas is just decent all around. Now, Memory of Dust isn't really bad, but most of the time Mona isn't going to have a shield, so you're going to miss out on a lot of its passive, and it might as well just be a 4-star at that point. So the other 5-star options end up being a lot better for consistency, and I would highly recommend those ones. However, there's a 4-star weapon that I prefer over some of the 5 stars, and that's the Widsith. It basically outperforms every 5-star when its passive is on, because it's going to give you a massive attack buff, a massive elemental mastery buff, or a massive elemental damage buff. When I say massive, I mean huge. Like, it is an absurd amount of damage bonus, attack percent, or elemental mastery, but it, again, nuke one, I get bonus. Definitely recommend it. Now, Solar Pearl from the Battle Pass also works, and if you're a free-to-play player, Map of Mare is going to be your best DPS choice if you don't have access to others, since it's going to have an EM main stat that'll help with both Vape and Electrocharge teams, and its passive gives elemental damage bonus. On top of that, Map of Mare is craftable, so if you want to, you can refine it and get higher elemental damage bonus, but I would also hold out if you're going to craft anything, because it's possible that whatever weapons released in Sumero could also be pretty good on Mona. Overall, though, there are other DPS weapons you can use. I recommend all of the ones we just talked about. Now, for support weapons, though, it's a different story. You do still want Mona to deal damage, and since her scaling on her burst is so high, and she gets the Omen debuff to put on enemies and increase her damage, she will hit pretty hard, and so you do want to invest into her in that way. However, you can also opt to use weapons that are less optimal for her, but help out the rest of your team. For example, you can use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers to give a massive attack buff to the character you switch to after Mona. It does take away a big part of her damage, but it ends up being worth it most of the time because it gives your Ganyu or Ayaka a huge boost if you're playing Morgana, and any characters that can snapshot that attack buff will take a lot of advantage of that weapon. Now, outside of it ends up being worth it most of the time because it gives your Ganyu or Ayaka a huge boost if you're playing Morgana, and any characters that can snapshot that attack buff will take a lot of advantage of that weapon. Now, outside of Thrilling Tales, you can opt for Sacrificial Fragments, which essentially is going to give you 2 elemental skills to use. After canceling the first one, it instantly gives you energy, so it helps Mona with energy generation as well. Favonia's Codex also gives energy recharge and has a chance to generate white particles when you crit, so either Sacrificial or Favonius will help Mona get her burst back, but Favonius is likely a little bit better, especially because it can battery other characters on your team as well. And lastly, you can also give Mona Prototype Amber if you want to make her a pseudo healer and also battery her more. I don't really like Prototype Amber personally, but it's really not that bad. The passive of it basically gives Mona 20% of her burst back after casting it, and it'll heal up your team a tiny bit. At Refinement 5, it becomes a lot more valuable too. I would personally take a weapon that helps you deal more damage while keeping uptime over Amber, but it's an option nonetheless. Again, there are tons of weapons that Mona can take advantage of, but these are the ones that I found to be the most effective, at least when I was playing Mona a lot recently. So next up, let's talk about different ways to build Mona and which one you should go for. Damage dealer, half times multiplier. While this sort of thing can be hard to set up, it's buffing your damage and adding opting for support Mona. Now, support Mona focuses around applying hydro, buffing your damage, and adding a bit of her own damage into the mix. To do that, you have a few artifact options. First, ask yourself if you have a Noblesse user in the team. Noblesse gives your team a 20% attack bonus after using her burst, and you want to have at least one of those in most teams, but not more than one. Mona's a pretty good candidate for Noblesse since her burst cooldown is really short and lets you use it pretty often. But if you already have a Noblesse user, you should try to opt for the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate set. Now, the main reason for that is for a support build, Mona cares more about her burst being up than anything else, and essentially, Emblem will allow you to build energy recharge on Mona to see a higher damage output with her burst. The 2-piece set gives 20% energy recharge, which is already a good bonus, but it also means that if you give her an energy recharge sands or an energy recharge weapon, or both, you're going to see an increase in her burst damage because of the set. Since she also gets damage bonus from energy recharge with her second ascension passive, you can build her with a bunch of ER and see better returns than the average character. For support Mona, this is like the dream come true perfect set. I absolutely love it and it's amazing. Now, you can also opt for some of the sets on the DPS build here, but Emblem just makes her a lot easier to build overall. Also, you do have the option of 4-piece tenacity to give you a passive 20% attack bonus when her skill is up, but be aware that her skill doesn't have 100% uptime, so tenacity is less useful on her than on other characters. Overall, I recommend Emblem over anything else for support Mona unless you don't have a Noblesse user already. Now for stats, I recommend running an energy recharge sands, a hydro damage goblet, and a crit circlet. That way you can still get decent bonus damage with Mona while taking advantage of her bursts buff. Now a few seconds ago, I talked about energy recharge for Mona, and you might be wondering, well Brax, how much energy recharge should I have? Well, in my experience and in some calculations, for a support Mona in something like Morgana for example, and just most of her teams in general, you're looking at around 220% or more. Her skill doesn't really generate its particles until it leaves the field, so most of the time, Mona's not going to be on field to pick those up in a support setup, and it can be harder for her to get her burst. She's not the most energy hungry character, but if you want to be safe with Mona and always have her burst, look to build at least that much for her in a support setup. And as for substats, you want to go for energy recharge up to 220%, follow that up with DPS stats like crit rate and damage and attack percent. Elemental mastery is basically useless in freeze teams, but it's not a bad stat to have in case an enemy happens to have pyro on them. It's just not the most useful one. That was a lot of information to take in, so I went ahead and made 2 example builds for you to get a visual idea of what you're looking for. The first build is a DPS Mona build featuring 4 Wanderers, attack hydro damage crit with Skyward Atlas or with Sith. If you wanted to make it even better for vaporized teams, you would run an Elemental Mastery Sands, but because those are pretty rare, in this example, there's an attack Sands. And for the second build, there's a 4-piece Emblem build with ER, hydro damage crit, and at least 220% energy recharge with Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers or Favonius Codex. This build would be best in a freeze team like Morgana.
It is as the stars foretold.
As per our contract.
What shall we do?
Let me scry.
Stabilize!
Delve into destiny. Written in the stars. Opening box of Adepti tricks.
Gather!
Shadows of fate.
All hail!
Let me scry.
Solidify! I will have order!
Delve into destiny. Shadows of fate.
Stabilize!
Wheel of life. Fate is upon you.
We're wake access denied.
Gather!
Let me scry. Decided by destiny. I can't wait any longer!
I guess the housework can wait.
Next on the agenda...
An assassin from our homeland, or a fool who trespasses upon the waters of Chingsa. Coveting the shapes of the living, pure water can take on many forms. In this way, shall water deliver your punishment. The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
Don't get too close!
Blaze over! Access denied!
Without solid ground, terrestrial creatures become simply helpless. The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
Born of ice and frost.
Crumble!
Check this out!
Boba, get them!
Here's backup!
Solidify!
One who is ignorant of water's treasures fails also to comprehend its horrors.
Access denied.
Rise!
Let's see what happens when you lose your foothold.
Gather!
The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
Don't get too close!
As long as rain falls and rivers flow, water will exist forever.
I'm here. This is how... No touching!
Stabilize.
Go. Delve into destiny. For Rex Lapis.
Solidify.
Orders given. Orders received.
This is order.
Shadows of fate.
Stabilize.
Wheel of life. Let me scribe. Access denied.
Gather.
Rise. Shadows of fate. Destiny cannot be denied.
Rise.
Ow.
Crumble. I'm feeling a little off. Quake.
Go. One, two. Just sharpen my spear.
Want me to come along?
I won't hold you back.
It is something of a luxury, but I love listening to the rain from the courtyard.
An assassin from our homeland, or a fool who trespasses upon the waters of Chainsa. Coveting the shapes of the living, pure water can take on many forms. In this way, shall water deliver your punishment.
Next up,
Solidify!
Teamwork is dreamwork!
The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
born of ice and frost.
Without solid ground, terrestrial creatures become simply helpless.
Stabilize!
The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
Light it up!
This is long overdue.
Fallen leaves, adorn my night!
Access denied.
One who is ignorant of water's treasures fails also to comprehend its horrors.
Wind strike!
No touching.
Let's see what happens when you lose your foothold.
Gather!
The power of water is its ability to take any shape.
Born of ice and frost.
Clouds high, the birds call!
I will have order!
No touching. Blaze over.
Stabilize!
As long as rain falls and rivers flow, water will exist for
As is a plan. Enjoy. There's a moist environment. And is best